So now we have familiar with aggregate demand, right? Just keep in mind. So this aggregate demand, there are two things. Number one, this aggregate demand is the demand as a function of aggregate price, not the price of a particular goods or service. Is aggregate price, number one. Number two, the upward slope of the aggregate demand curve. The reason behind that is slightly different from the individual aggregate demand curve, right? So that's what we need to pay attention to, okay? Now we move to the supply side. Okay? We are going to look at aggregate supply curve, similar to aggregate demand. So this is going to show the relationship between aggregate price and the aggregate supply. So here, so we also use real GDP. Remember, so we can look at GDP through aggregate demand. So essentially that's expenditure. We can also look at aggregate supply. So that's what we are going to study. So that's essentially is a product. But finally, we can also look at GDP through the lens of income, right? So these three, they should give you the same number or they are equivalent, right? Why? It's because so each dollar I spend goes to somebody else's income. So these two are equivalent. But so the product or the revenue we generate must return to the owner of the factors, right? So in that sense, product equals income. So that's the three equivalent. Okay. So now, in terms of aggregate supply, so we need to differentiate between here. So this is a title of the slides: short run versus long run. Let's start with short run. And short run here, we should understand this is like a couple of months, usually less than a year. Okay? And short run, the difference from long run is, so we don't not have enough time, let the economy to adjust. And then, so in the short run, so we are going to see a very interesting pattern or very interesting relationship between price and aggregate supply, right? So this is a upward slope, which means higher the price, higher the aggregate supply. But what is behind this upward slope short run aggregate supply curve? So this is what we need to understand, right? So the secret behind this upward slope aggregate supply curve in the short run is because the stickiness of nominal wage. But what does sticky means? And in particular, what does sticky nominal wage means? Okay. I guess some of our students have a job, right? So either part-time or full-time job. Okay. So when you sign the contract with your employer, okay, so some may say, I don't have a contract, but usually you have a verbal agreement. So that's considered as a contract, right? So when you sign that contract, usually the contract will specify the wage rate. So the employer is going to pay you. And usually, so this wage rate is fixed for a few months. And sometimes usually it's like a year. So for example, so I have a job, I work for Burger King. And then the Burger King says, okay, so I'm going to pay you, we are going to pay you $20 per hour. And this wage rate is going to go for 6 months or a year, right? So that's usually what happens, okay? So this fixed wage rate over an extended period, whether it's a 6 months or 1 year, so this is called stickiness. Okay? This stickiness of the nominal wage, by the way, so this is nominal in the sense it's a dollar term. If Burger King says, okay, so I'm going to pay you 2 burgers per hour. So that's real wage, right? So nominal wage says, okay, so as store owner, I'm going to pay you $20 for each hour you work. And so this contract is good for 6 months or a year. Right? So this usually what happens. Now let's see how this stickiness of nominal wage is going to affect the aggregate supply in the short run when there's a price change, right? So that's what we're going to understand. Okay, so I'll just give you some numbers so that you understand. Let's say, for example, okay, use the example. Let's just follow the example I just gave to you. I just have a job. So this job from the local Burger King store. So they are going to offer me $20 per hour, right? So this is $20 per hour. Okay, so that's where we start. So this is good for 1 year, right? So this is usually how the labor market looks like, right? Okay, let's say when I sign the contract, the price level is such that per each burger is going to cost, let me just simplify the analysis, okay? So each burger is going to cost me $5 per burger. Okay. So that's equivalent to say, so Burger King, the store, must pay me 4 burgers per hour of my work, right? Okay, and so what is the, at the meantime, let's just say for each hour, I can make 20 burgers, or I can sell 20 burgers. Okay, so in 1 hour. Okay, so that means the profit I can make or I can help the store make in 1 hour equal to the following, right? So each burger is going to sell for $5, and I make 20 burgers in an hour. And then so the store need to pay me $20 per hour. So that's my labor cost, right? And usually, so we need to buy some ingredients, right? Let's say, for example, so the ingredients, $2 per burger. So that just means, so it's going to cost $40. So the ingredient includes buns, ground beef, cheese, some oil, right? They also need to pay for utility, rent, so on and so forth, right? So this is, and then so we can easily come up what's the profit. This 100 minus 20 minus 40. This is going to be $40 profit, right? So this says, okay, so if I work for Burger King at a contract of $20 per hour, and given the current price, the burger is going to sell for $5, right? And so I can make 20 burgers in an hour. So then the Burger King hire me for 1 hour. So that's a profit they can make. So the profit comes from, so this is the revenue, right? 20 burgers sell for $100. And so for each burgers, this costs $2. Again, think about the buns, ground beef, cheese, utility, water, okay? And finally, so they need to pay me $20. This is the nominal wage, right? Usually this is like a binding contract for a year or for 6 months, right? So depending on your job, usually this is how it is, right? So end up with $40, right? So now go to the step number 3. There's inflation. Okay. Now let's just make the calculation simple. Say, for example, we have 100% of inflation. And then so we can easily do the same calculation. So the profit. So what's the profit? So now the burger is going to sell $10 because 100% of inflation. I can still make $20. I can still make 20 burgers per hour. right? So this 100 times 20, sorry, 10 times 20. So because burger becomes $10 versus $5, right? And then the ingredient also expensive. So now 4 times 20. Now the interesting part is the wage. As I said, the wage, nominal wage is sticky, meaning in the short run, regardless of what happened, the wage rate will fix. So this is where we agreed as the employee and the employer, right? So, but you may ask me, so why the wage is sticky? So one reason is, I guess you can ask yourself, do you like your employer to adjust your wage on a daily basis? You don't like that, right? So you want to have some security, right? So you want to have some stable income. But certainly this comes with a cost. The cost should show up in this calculation. Now, so they're going to still pay you $20, but certainly you pay the cost. Why? Because prior to the inflation, as we just calculated, you work 1 hour, or I work 1 hour for Burger King, so I can buy 4 burgers. But now the price is $10. For $20 of hard work, I can only get 2 burgers. So I'm suffering, right? So let's just wait the discussion on this suffering later. But first look at what does this means to the profit of the business. Okay? And so you can find out profit is going to increase, right? And also I want to highlight, so here, the main reason why the profit increase is largely because the fixed nominal wage. Okay. So the way that we understand is, so everything becomes more expensive, but the one particular cost is fixed, which is wage. Okay. So in that sense, so the business, they makes more profit by hiring more worker. And furthermore, that just means because of the stickiness of the wage rate. Okay, so if there's increase in price, the business has the incentive to hire more worker at that level of price or a level of wage, so that they can make more profit. So that also explains why the short run aggregate supply curve is upward slope. Right, so this is how we end up with the aggregate supply. But again, this is short run, right? All right, so this here, I just use the example to help you understand, right? So let's just look at the slides, right? And just complete those definition we just go through. Nominal wage is the dollar amount of the wage paid. Like the example I just gave to you, Burger King pay me $20 per hour, so this is nominal wage. But we can convert that into real wage. Before price change, burger is $5. So $20 means Burger King pay me 4 burgers, right? And actually, so the best way to understand is through real wage. Before price change, they pay me 4 burgers. After price change, so they only need to pay me 2 burgers. So because I can make $20 per hour, so before the price change, so they essentially they just get 16 burgers out of me, right? Because I make 20 burgers. Before price change, they need to pay me 4 burgers. That's the real cost of this $20, right? So in 1 hour, I make $16 for Burger King. But after price change, I still make 20 burgers. But now, so this $20, I can only get two burgers for myself, or equivalently, they only pay me 2 burgers. Now that means in 1 hour, now Burger King is going to extract 18 burgers from me. But now you see the difference, right? Because of the price change. So the business owner, they extract more surplus from the worker. but certainly they have incentive to hire more worker, right? Okay, so this is nominal wage. But certainly you may be wondering what would happen next. So that's what we are going to that's exactly what we are going to discuss. Okay, just bear me for a second. Nominal wage, sticky wage, they just says nominal wage are slow to adjust. Particularly, it may not fall even there's high unemployment. Usually, if there's high unemployment and the worker is willing to work for lower wage, right? Because for a worker, the option is unemployed versus a low-paid job. All right? And then certainly you prefer a low-paid job versus unemployed. All right? So, but the sticky wage says even we have a high unemployment rate, the wage may fail to fall. Because usually because there's like a binding contract, right? Now, on the other hand, the wage may slow to rise even we have facing a labor shortage. But what is labor shortage? So due to the COVID-19, so we are experiencing this labor shortage, right? So you've probably seen from newspapers or from local advertisement. So they was offering sign-up bonus for new jobs. So that's a sign of labor shortage, right? But then, so in reality, even in the face of labor shortage, the wage failed to rise. But you may wonder why the wage must rise. The bonus, signing bonus is kind of example of wage rise, right? But usually, so the wage failed to adjust. So this is called sticky wage, right? Now here, we just use another way to express the example I just gave to you, right? So how sticky wage affect short-run aggregate supply? We look at profit per unit. So the profit per unit equal to price per unit minus cost per unit. Okay. When price increase, due to the sticky wage, the production cost per unit usually stay constant. So, and then the profit will rise with the price. So that's what happened. Okay. If the profit increase, and then business owner has the incentive to hire more, to expand, so they make more profit, right? So they are rational. Okay. Right. So regarding to this short-run aggregate supply curve, so I want to add one more point. Most firms in our economy, they are in very competitive industry. Okay? Think about the grocery, right? So, but in some case, we have firm, they have some market power. Think about Apple, even think about Google. Okay? And then, so they may rise the price even when demand is strong. So let's just go back to previous slides. So that just means they are going to make more, they're not only able to maintain the production costs, they can even raise the price, so make more profit. So that's going to make the short-run aggregate supply curve slope higher. Or this is further support for the positive slope of short-run aggregate supply curve. Okay. Now, we are going to see the factors can lead to a shift of the short-run aggregate supply curve. So this here, the analysis is parallel to what we discussed for aggregate demand. We are going to look at the factors cause this curve shift to the left or shift to the right, right? So there are the following factors: commodity price. But what is considered as commodity in this discussion? So example, oil, mineral, okay? And then so you can also include cotton, corn, so on and so forth. Okay? And here, so this commodity essentially is basic ingredients we need for manufacturing to manufacturing goods. Right? So if the price of those commodity decline, so that's going to increase the profitability. Hence, that's going to boost up the aggregate supply in the short run, right? So this is the first factor. Second factor, nominal wage. So because wage is the main cause of production. If wage falls, then profitability will increase. Hence, the aggregate supply will increase. Right? This is similar to commodity price. Next one, productivity. So if your productivity increase, you can produce more at a given resource, and then your profitability will increase. And then so the aggregate demand will increase, right? So those are the factors can cause the aggregate supply to shift to left or shift to right. Okay. Here's how it looks like on a diagram. So we have short run aggregate supply, upward slope, higher price due to the stickiness of wage leads to higher supply. So now if the commodity price increase, okay, and then it becomes more expensive to produce, less profitable for business owner, aggregate supply will decline. So hence we are going to shift to left-hand side. Or on other case, if the nominal wage increase due to the bargaining power from labor union, right? And then so the profitability of the business will decline, aggregate supply will decline. Right? On the other hand, so if commodity price decline, nominal wage decline, or productivity increase, then we are going to see an increase in aggregate supply. The curve shifts to the right-hand side, right? So this just leaves all the example I just gave to you, right? Decrease in commodity price, decrease in nominal wage, increase in productivity. So each of those factors leads to increase of profit per firm. Then each of them has incentive to increase the supply. So leads to aggregate supply to increase. But of course, this is in short run. Right? So this is how things happen. Okay. On the other hand, so this is a leftward shift, right? Increase in commodity price. Or if there's an increase in nominal wage, or finally, if there's a decline in productivity. Right? So that's going to reduce the profitability and then reduce aggregate supply. Okay. Now let's look at this practice question. The short run aggregate supply curve will shift to the right. If the curve shifts to the right, means aggregate supply is increased. But what causes the aggregate supply to increase? Okay. What causes aggregate supply to increase? So let's go one by one. First, input costs increase. So that's going to reduce aggregate supply. Tax increase, that's going to reduce aggregate supply, right? Because reduce profitability. Interest rate increase, that's going to reduce the aggregate supply because it's more expensive to do business, to invest. Finally, when productivity rise, so that is going to decrease. Sorry, that's going to increase aggregate supply, right? Okay, so the answer is D. Right, so now we are going to move from short run to long run, right? And then so in the long run, what would happen? Okay. So in the long run, the economy is going to adjust. And particularly it's going to adjust with change in price. Now we need to go back to the earlier example. So in the earlier example, we said, so the nominal wage is $20. Before price change, so this is equivalent to 4 burgers, right? So Burger King paid me 4 burgers per hour. Now, because of price increase, the wage is still at $20. Is equivalent to say Burger King pay me 2 burgers, right? So now ask yourself, if you work for Burger King, before you make 4 burgers per hour, now you can only buy 2 burgers for 1 hour's hard work. Ask yourself, what are you going to do? Are you going to suck it up, or are you going to do something? So usually, so you will ask for wage raise, right? Because you're going to complain with the manager, says, so I can only make 2 burgers. How can I feed my family? Or how can I pay my other bills, right? But certainly, so the manager can resist your complaint. And then, so what are you going to do? So you may go to other store, whoever can offer you a higher price or higher wage. But now, what does that mean to the business? Right? So that just means, so eventually, due to the pressure from the worker side, the business must raise the wage. If they raise the wage, what does that mean to profit? Remember in earlier discussion, right? So one way to see why the aggregate supply increase in the short run is like in this case. For 1 hour before price change, so I essentially make 16 free burgers to Burger King, right? Because they pay me 4 burgers. I make 20 burgers, 16. After price change, so they can extract 18 burgers from me, right? Now, so over time, in the short run, so yes, we agree, so right? So we have a binding contract, whether it's verbal, it's written. I agree work for Burger King for $20. In the short run, so I may have to suck it up, but over time I start to complain. And I may even quit to looking for a better job. So in that case, Burger King, under the pressure, must raise the wage, right? So eventually, so under which point, so the company will stop. Usually, so they are going to maintain my standard of living, which is pay me 4 burgers. But then in return, so that just means eventually the surplus or the profit Burger King can extract from a hard work will reduce to 16 again, right? Because again, so here, the real wage is 4. Here, the real wage is 2 because of price change. But eventually, So the worker is going to complain. So they must raise the wage back to the normal level. So, and then, so what this means? That just means once we give the economy enough time to adjust, okay? And then suddenly this stickiness of the nominal wage will disappear because of the bargaining, right? Because of the rational behavior of each side of the market. Now, furthermore, if this extra profit disappear over time, what does that mean to aggregate supply? So that immediately means the aggregate supply will return to the original level because there's no extra profit to make, right? So originally, it's why the aggregate supply increased. It's because look at it here. So this extra profit I can make by hiring. But over time, the workers start to complain. So I must raise wage until a point so they stop to complain. But then so at that point, there's no extra profit I can make. And why would I want to increase my aggregate supply? So everything will back to ground zero. Right? But then, so from this discussion, certainly first, we notice there's a difference in short-run aggregate supply and long-run aggregate supply. That's number one. Number two, so we should learn that in the long run, price doesn't matter to aggregate supply. Why? Because again, so look at this example. Any temporary profit coming from changing price will disappear due to the bargaining between worker and the employer, or due to the adjustment in the market, because everyone are rational, everyone behave on their best interest, right? So price won't matter over long term, particularly in determining the aggregate supply. But then, so we may ask a question. In the long run, what determines how much we produce? Oh, by the way, so this is how the long run aggregate supply curve looks like. So essentially, so you change your price, it doesn't matter to how much you can produce or how much you're willing to supply. Okay, so this is in the long run. But then the next question is, what determines where we are? So why we are in this particular level? Okay, the answer to these particular questions goes back an equation we discussed when we study economic growth. So when we study economic growth, we say the production of our economy will be determined by the following things. So this includes technology. This includes human capital. This includes physical capital. Okay. At some points, you may also want to include land, right, and other resources. Okay. And actually, so this equation will determine where we are. Okay? Or in other words, the long run aggregate supply will be determined by our technological level, determined by the stock of human capital and the physical capital, determined by the labor supply, and determined by the land we own, the mineral reserve we have. Okay. The key thing is price becomes irrelevant over long term. That's just because the price will adjust, particularly the labor costs, right? So this is long run aggregate supply. Okay. And other things I want to emphasize is, so in the long run, the level of real GDP we call potential output. Okay, so this is what we potentially can produce. Now, there's one thing I want to highlight. At this potential output, the unemployment rate usually is not equal to 0, and usually it's greater than 0. But what determines this unemployment rate, or what unemployment rate we are at this potential GDP? And then so we need to go back to the earlier discussion. We have studied 3 types of unemployment, right? So what are those 3 types of unemployment? We talk about, yes, thank you. So we talk about frictional, structural, and cyclical. And these 2 we call natural. And actually here, so when we say we are producing potential output, simply, so we have unemployment rate at the natural level, okay, not 0. So this natural unemployment rate is necessary, and in some sense, it's beneficial to our economy. Just particular thing about frictional, right? Because with frictional unemployment, because that just means that people are looking for a better job, fit their skill, fit their preference. Structural unemployment. So we are going to get rid of those low skilled or less productive sector. So help the economy move to a better or brighter future, right? Think about earlier example I give to you. In 1990s, right? So there's a job, like, so there are the operators who just keep sending message, like a pager, right? And then, so in 1990s, so we have, or even earlier, so we have these elevator operator, right? But eventually everything becomes so smart, we don't need an individual or human being to do those boring jobs, right? So yes, temporarily we create structural unemployment, but with better education and training, so we just move forward and expand our production possibility from here. So in that sense, so the natural unemployment is necessary, and in most cases, it can be beneficial. All right, so this is long-run aggregate supply. So make sure you understand the difference between long-run aggregate supply and a short-run aggregate supply, and particularly why in the long run, the aggregate supply is independent of price, okay? Now here, so we just look at the actual data, right? So here, this is a potential output. So this is what we can produce when unemployment rate is at the level of natural unemployment rate. And then this line, this blue line, is what we actually produce. Usually there's a gap, right? If this gap is negative, means we have higher unemployment. We are in a recession. And occasionally we have a positive gap, means we are in the expansion. Okay, now we are ready to understand what caused this gap. And also we are going to discuss, so how the economy is going to adjust. This is in absence of government, right? But then, so from the discussion, so you're going to see, so we have a reason to let the government to intervene. But first we need to understand, so what would happen if the economy fluctuates, how the economy is going to respond, right? It's just like a human being. So what will happen if we hit by a virus, either the flu or COVID-19, right? And how our immune system is going to respond, right? And then that's going to justify, okay, so should I take some medicine or should we have some vaccination, right? So here, so this medicine or vaccination play a role of the government. Okay, there's lots of similarity, but first we need to understand the science behind the fluctuation of our economy, and then so we can answer the questions. So the role of the government. Okay. All right. So now before I show you the entire model, because remember, so we are in the chapter, so we are trying to look at aggregate demand and aggregate supply, and then so we are going to jointly look at the fluctuation of output. So that's the eventual goal, right? Okay, so now we can look at some dynamics. Okay, so kind of like a preview or kind of starter. Okay, so this is long-run aggregate supply. This is short-run aggregate supply. Say, for example, currently we are operating in this point. And certainly the price level is will be elevated. Now look at the GDP. So this is actual. So this is potential. So we compare here and then, so there is a positive gap. Right? So meaning so we produce more than we can potentially produce. So now ask yourself, or trying to think about how the economy is going to respond. The secret lies into labor market. Okay. So what happened in labor market? And particularly what happened in terms of unemployment rate right now? If we produce more than we can potentially produce. And at this point, usually the unemployment rate is very, very low, right? Because you are operating beyond your full capacity in some sense, right? So you are, usually you work 5 days a week, 10 hours a day. So now you may operate 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, right? So, and then so naturally means you hire a lot and unemployment rate is low. Now, if the unemployment rate is low, okay, and then so what does that mean to nominal wage? So certainly, this means you have a shortage of labor, right? Because unemployment rate is low. Everyone has a job if they want. Now, the wage must adjust. Otherwise, the employer cannot hire what you want. So that just means wage eventually is going to rise. But now remember earlier discussion, right? So if nominal wage increase, what does that mean to short-run aggregate supply? Okay? So that implies the short-run aggregate supply will reduce. Why? Because it becomes more expensive to hire. Now then immediately you can see the aggregate supply will adjust until we hit this point. Or in other words, we back to our potential or back to the normal, right? So this is what happens if we overreach or overreach or overproduce, right? So now on the other hand, so if we are in this level, okay, now opposite things happen, right? So the actual GDP, so this actual is below our potential, right? So it's below our potential. What it means in terms of labor market. In the labor market, the unemployment rate will be elevated, right? Because you cannot produce produce as you should be. But then if unemployment rate is high, what does that mean to nominal wage? So it implies nominal wage will adjust, will go down. Then there's a furthermore, if nominal wage decrease, how would that affect short-run aggregate supply? That's going to increase, right? Because cheaper to hire labor. And then so the curve will shift right until we hit this point here. Or in other words, until we return to our potential, right? So this is how the economy is going to adjust. Right? And actually, so now here, we have some flavor of the fluctuation of the economy, and then we kind of see how the economy is going to respond, right? And particularly, so when we have this unemployment, high unemployment, right? Now we are ready to use what we have learned to understand a big question: what caused recession, right? But what is recession? Okay, so in the worst day in our history, in 1933, the big recession hit us. The unemployment rate was 25%. Real GDP dropped by 27%. Okay? So now we are ready to understand what made all these bad things happen. And then next we are going to study, so what we can do, right? So that's going to justify the government's role in this discussion, okay? So here there's a few pictures to show you what the harm the recession can bring to us, right? And before I show you the full model, so here is bring you the data to confirm the existence of stickiness of the nominal wage, right? So we look at the data from 1997 to 2013, and this red one is unemployment rate. This green one is the percentage of workers receiving the same wage. Now look at here. We have unemployment rates as elevated. And presumably, so you're going to see less and less workers receive the same wage, right? Because unemployment rate high, if the wage can adjust, so the wage will reduce. But instead of reduced wage, you can see there are more and more workers receive the same amount of wage rate. On the other hand, so you have a decline in unemployment rate once we're in the expansion mode. And presumably, so the fraction of people receive the same wage will increase. But instead of increase, it doesn't change, even decline. So here, this is supposed to decline, and here, this is supposed to increase. But instead, this part increase and this decline. So that is evidence of the existence of stickiness of nominal wage, right? It does exist. But you may wondering why this stickiness wage exists. Okay? So I give you one reason earlier, right? Because people prefer some stability. On the other hand, so there are other reasons. Think about maybe there's like a regulation, right? So the government may not allow you to adjust wage, right? Or maybe the business is fear to lose their employee, right? So there are many reasons, but here the key thing is it is real, it is there. Okay, so that's going to affect our economy, and that's going also is going to lead to our discussion of AD and SAS model. So this model is going to help us to understand what caused recession. Okay, and also we are going to, through the lens of this model, to understand how the economy is going to respond, how the economy is going to adjust. And from those discussions, we are going to see the potential role of our government, right?